Okay, welcome back to the second video in the second unit, looking at brain performance and brain function. So now we're going to talk about brain waves. I mean, after all, we're in the neurofeedback field, and we should have a pretty good understanding of this whole idea of brain waves, because in traditional neurofeedback, that's what we're training. That's how the filters are set up, so that if we want to train for more attention, for example, a greater focus, let's say, we want to train for that, then we have a filter for, let's say, delta brainwave activity, slow brainwave activity. We want to make less of that, and beta or 12 hertz or 15 hertz, whatever activity, we want to make more of that. So that's the traditional kind of neurofeedback. And the feedback might come in seeing things go up and seeing things go down, or it might come in a bird flying or an airplane launching or whatever. But somehow you know when you're kind of doing that task. Well, we're in direct neurofeedback. We don't have to do that. We don't have to set up filters and train people to do that. The brain just gets freed up to optimize performance with the direct neurofeedback. But we still need to know about brainwaves. And in fact, on the screen that you're going to see, the display screen with the live stream system, you're going to see at the bottom of the screen is the raw EEG scrolling across the bottom of the screen. And then there's a lot of information in that, just in 1 second of that. So a tremendous amount of information. And then up above that, you're going to see kind of the categories of brainwaves, how much energy is in that moment in that squiggly down at the bottom that it's talking about. So it goes up and down like pistons in a car. You'll see that. And then up above that is a topographical display, a topographical map of what is happening. It comes like a second at a time toward you. So you can see the past and see the present at a glance. And the typical pattern you're going to see there is on the left-hand side of that, you're going to see orange, and it's going to be the delta activity, and then theta activity, and then alpha activity, and then it's kind of flat, typically. And slow waves are dominant. The very slowest waves are the most dominant, the delta activity. And then next is theta, next is alpha, and then flat. Why is it flat? So let's go through all this. So when cells fire, when a number of cells fire together, creates a wave. Just one cell firing will make energy go out, and it goes out in a sphere, right? Because the brain is mostly liquid, so like Jello, so it goes out in all directions. So if you have a gazillion of these brain cells and they're all working, then you've got all these things just going in different directions. So there's no waves. But when you have a clump of cells, it's a technical term, clump of cells slowly together, then it makes these waveforms. So I'll come back to this concept, but what you'll see is the left-hand side is delta activity. So delta brainwaves is the name we give for the slowest of brainwaves, from 1 hertz, boop, 1 a second, to about 4 a second. Boom, 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 boom. And they tend to have the highest amplitude in terms of going up and going down, and going up and going down. We measure amplitude of things. And they're the slowest, and they tend to be the brainwave made the language of the part of the brain that is constantly telling us it's time to go to sleep right now. Go to sleep now. With people with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, it's very common that the ratio of delta and other slow waves like theta is much higher to the faster I'm thinking now brainwaves. They're just more slow wave activity. in the brain going on of somebody with ADHD. That's why it's not uncommon to see them get up and walk around a lot. Even in a meeting, like, why are they getting up and walking around? Because their brain is saying, go to sleep right now. And so instead of doing that, they get up and walk around. Hyperactive kids, whatever. We see this pretty commonly. And then the other place we see it is with head trauma. And it could be emotional trauma, and it could be physical trauma. So slow brainwave activity, and here's kind of how that works. So the next slow wave is theta activity. So think of that from like 5 to 8 beats a second. So theta activity is children have a dominant theta activity level. A lot of their memories are stored, however that works, they're stored in theta activity level. And so when we get our brains in a theta activity level, sometimes we're thinking childhood stuff. What do you remember when you're staring into a big raging bonfire and you're sitting there, campfire, and you're just looking at the flickering of the flames? What do you start to think about? What do you think about when you look at a Zamboni machine at a hockey rink? I'm sorry, just you do that, you know that. But a campfire flickers at high theta, low alpha activity, and very commonly we start thinking about childhood memories because they're kind of stored at that brainwave pattern. As adults, we make less of that activity, so it gets harder to access those memories. But when we can slow our brains down by looking at a campfire, a bonfire, we can often access those memories either on purpose or by accident. Kind of a weird side note. But slow brainwave activity, delta and theta activity primarily, parts of the brain are in neutral, like when you put your car in neutral and it idles. Whoa, 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 whoa. It's an idling rhythm. So, even though it's also parts of the brain going, let's go to sleep now, but if you have a head injury, that part of the brain, it was not dead, it's probably not dead, it's probably just stunned, and stunned brain cells get protected by the rest of the brain, enzymes and stuff to protect the injured part of the brain, and that part of the brain now is idling, just like your car in neutral. Whoop, 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 idling, waiting for somebody to tell it what to do and bring it back online. And so as you're doing this treatment, you will often see little teeny tiny squiggles and then interrupted by the spindle of slow brainwave activity and then back to little teeny tiny squiggles. And that's an indication that even though the electrodes are in the front part of the head here, somewhere in the brain there's a clump of cells that are just whoop, 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 and you're able to pick that up now with this electrode. There's some part of the brain that's in neutral. I've seen this a lot of times with contact sport athletes, and by the 6th or 7th session, never see it again. And we start to see their performance really, really improve because there's some head injury that we're working on bringing back online with the direct neurofeedback. It's fascinating things. But think of slow brain waves as either go to sleep now or as some clump of brain cells somewhere that for whatever reason, a traumatic injury or a physical injury are in neutral and it's an idling rhythm. So this becomes interesting when we're talking about somebody in traditional neurofeedback will say, I want you to make more fast beta brainwaves. Well, I don't know if you can, because the more you make your brain think, the less waves you get, because waves come from the brain cells being in neutral. And you don't get them. So that's why what you'll see on the screen is on the left-hand side of the screen, the high slow waves, and then theta, and then alpha, and then it's flat going across the screen. Because those are the brain cells that are working, and they're not making waves. They're just all working. So you'll notice that. So delta are the slowest waves, and the highest amplitude, and the most energy in our brains. Then theta. So theta activity is sort of the transitional place between my brain's working hard and I'm going to go to sleep now. It's what gets really activated in I'm falling asleep. Boop, energy's going that way. Also, that's the state that can be really creative and inventive, and that's what I think it was Thomas Edison would deprive himself of sleep, and he had some little metal clinker from a foundry, metal ball, and he'd hold it in his hands, and he'd lean up against the wall, and when he'd start to fall asleep, he'd drop the ball, and that would wake him up, and then whatever he was thinking about at the time, he'd go and write it down, and it would be like some invention that he'd write down. It's a very creative place. So a musician that's composing music gets in that place. An author, when they're just totally engrossed in their story and the theater inside their mind, they're in that theta. They're in that place. So we talked about Gene Peniston and others that were doing alpha theta training, teaching you to make theta activity, teaching you to make alpha activity, and it just enhanced creativity in people. So theta activity is important. Alpha activity, now the brain makes alpha activity anytime you close your eyes, because the whole back part of your brain where you do vision, the occipital lobes, you just turn them off, and so they're back there idling. Wah, 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 wah. So if you put electrodes back here and you close your eyes, you're going to pick up a lot of alpha activity right away. So you open your eyes and it goes back to work. And that's the principle with any slow brainwave. But it's really hard for you to see somebody be able to display alpha activity on your screen when you're training unless you help prompt them to do that. So it is possible for somebody to make alpha activity peak right there on your screen if they will close their eyes. So now it's radiating starting from back here, and then make the rest of their brain quiet. You can start to pick up that alpha activity made in the back of the brain, even in the electrodes up here. So try it. You try it. Well, you won't be able to see it, but you can take a video of it. But close your eyes, and then just don't have any language inside your head. Your mind can be very aware of what's outside of you. Your mind can be very aware of what your body feels like. Your mind can go to the beach, sit at a lake, create music, do a wide variety of things. Just can't talk, because once you start having speech, language inside your head, those cells are all working really hard, and you can't pick up the alpha activity in the front part of the head. So if people can make their brain quiet, seriously, people can take a weekend vacation in 5-6 minutes doing the direct neurofeedback and making their brain quiet. It's pretty interesting. And you'll see the alpha activity, see the delta come down, see the theta come down, and then this peak of alpha activity will come up as people get better and better at it. It's great to see. It's kind of fun, very refreshing, relaxing, restoring in the brain. So that's the alpha activity. That's the brain in neutral, is alpha activity. Up above that is SMR. You'll hear that term a lot, sensory motor rhythm. That's that 12 hertz rhythm that Barry Sturman was training with the cats, and that athletes make when they're focused, shooting a free throw, kicking a field goal. That's that rhythm that we make at that point. Then we have beta activity farther up the scale. That's your brain at work. And low beta activity tends to be your brain at work, but you're not talking. You're doing your taxes, but you're not talking. You're figuring stuff out, planning for the future, but there's no language going on inside your head. You're just doing this thing. And then as you go higher up the scale in beta, now you got language. Now you got a coach talking. And it might be telling you you're not doing it right, or you got to hurry up, or you got to get this thing done. because you're heading up the scale toward anxiety at that point. The faster beta tends to be cause anxiety. But your brain's working really hard at that point. Then really, really high up the scale is gamma activity. This is what Jonathan Cowan in Kentucky does a lot with. He's got a neurofeedback system, his peak achievement trainer, that actually can train the brain to make more 40 hertz activity. That's from the thalamus, deep in the brain. It's scanning everything in the brain all the time at 40 hertz, 40 cycles a second. And it decides what's important, what's new, what's happening. It has two main functions. It on one side, it does a lot with memory and learning and processing things. I just learned something new. Is it important? Yeah, it is. Boom, let's consolidate this. That's the gamma activity. But also flow state. So in flow state, you'll see, somebody will show you brainwaves, somebody in the flow state. And that's like alpha activity, alpha and theta activity, because the front part of your head's got to be quiet to be in the flow state. You're just doing it. And so you see these brainwaves, but riding on top of it, you'll see these 40 hertz gamma waves. And that sort of binds everything together. It's necessary for this flow state. So a downhill skier, for example, has practiced that run 5-6 times physically, and then mentally 100 times. They're watching the video, they're watching their GoPro video, they're doing it in their head, they know exactly what it is they want to do and when they're going to do it, and they are not thinking when they're going downhill at 75 miles an hour. They're not thinking. They're just doing this, what they practiced. And at that point, they have this hypofrontality. The front part of the brain's not working so hard. This is the football coach saying, don't think, just do what we trained you to do. Don't think, just respond. Don't think, just react. You see this, go there. Don't think. Because when you think, when that coach comes on in the front part of your head, hey, the ego comes in, you're thinking about the future, thinking about the past, thinking about what's next, thinking about performance. You hesitate. So that's why you just train to do it, and then you just do what you're trained to do. You don't hesitate then. So gamma activity is very helpful in that. When we have hypofrontality, gamma activity will help take all the stuff you've done 1,000 times and just boom, make it happen. So we don't train that with the direct neurofeedback system, but it's important for you to understand that it is out there and your brain's doing that. And that's the only way to get into a flow state. So anyway, those are those things you're going to see across your screen: delta, theta, alpha, slow beta called SMR, low beta, high beta, flow state. So you don't see the flow state. That just all creates that. So as you see it go like this across, if you see peaks out here at the beta stage, like cones coming up, peaks coming up, if you see that, you probably have a bad connection. And you need to just double check the connection. Look at the waveform, the tracing going across the screen. It's probably going to be really jiggly, sharp like this. It's probably a bad connection. Check it out. And or there's a lot of muscle tension, like the person has a bad migraine or something like that going on. That would peak up things in the back, and you'll see that muscle tension. You'll see up at that higher end, that anxious kind of end, and then as 2 or 3 stems, and it'll go down. You'll see that. But if it just looks weird, it is weird because probably bad connections. Just for example, I had this yesterday with a client, and it showed those cones, and the tracing just looked not right. The amplitudes were really high, and it just didn't look right. So I took the leads off and redid everything here, and it still wasn't quite right. So I took out the lead wires, the waffle wires. I took them out of the amplifier, threw them in the trash, and I put in new wires, and I got a perfect tracing, and everything was great. So somewhere along the line, those wires had worn out, or they'd been broken, or whatever, and I just threw them away. So anyway, you'll see that in the tracing. So that's the brainwave stuff with the brain. Again, we're not training that. We'll see changes in it. We'll see the slow brain waves, the amplitude come down. We'll see that. It's measurable. Maybe not in this session, but session by session, we'll see it. But this is what you'll see on the screen when it comes to the brainwave activity. And in the next video, we're going to talk about, we're just going to do it in this video. All right, so let's just finish this up because it's not going to be much. Don't need to make another video. We'll just do it right here. Slower, higher amplitude brainwaves are idling rhythms. We talked about this just a second ago. So you'll observe it with head injuries or traumas, including emotional traumas, PTSD. You'll see it leaking through. Or you'll also observe it when people's eyes are closed, they're making alpha activity. Their brains are quiet, eyes are closed. Rarely, I've had 4 people who could do this in 10 years, but they could do it. They could make high, isolated alpha activity with their eyes open. All of them were athletes. 2 of them were snipers. Long rifles, snipers, 2 of them. And so they would literally imagine a target at 1,000 yards and it'd be in their sights and they're ready to, it's right when they're ready to pull the trigger. They would make this high alpha activity. An archer will make that right when they're about to release the arrow. When they got the target and they're about to release it and their brain's quiet, they'll make that alpha activity. And then this 4th guy just heard the stories about the other 3 and he said, oh, I want to figure out how to do that. And so he's a runner, and so he was just trying to get into that mental state. And he could do it. I don't know. He's the 4th guy in 10 years I've seen him do that. So it is possible to make alpha activity with eyes open, but it's rare. Yeah, it's pretty rare. You have to do it on purpose. We can inhibit slow brainwave activity. We can inhibit delta activity. A number of my clients were looking at my screen on the computer and they see the high delta peak, the red stuff, and I'll tell them, if you can focus, you can make that go down. And when you make it go down, that is actually the technical definition of focus, is inhibiting slow brainwave activity. And they'll play with it. It makes no difference to treatment with the direct neurofeedback. Doesn't matter what they're doing, but they'll play with it. And they'll learn how to focus and concentrate by learning how to inhibit the delta activity. If they really focus, they can make it pretty much go away, make it all flatline. And that increases their sense of self-regulation and self-control to learn how to do it. So that feedback is available on our screens if they're able to see it and they want to play that game. They can do that. Okay, we'll stop there and we'll go to Unit 3. Thanks.